folks, how you doing? It's Captain Croll here, Captain Croll's Movie Reviews. Today we're going to be focusing on the 1990 film Rocky V, starring Sylvester Stallone in the iconic role as Rocky Balboa, also reuniting the original Rocky 1976 director John J. Avildsen with Stallone, who came back to direct this one. Rocky V is also known as one of the least favorites of the entire Rocky saga, and I'll get into why that is. Did I hate Rocky V? No, I did not hate Rocky V. But there's definitely some cons which I agree with the fans, and we'll get right into that. Rocky V picks up after the events of Rocky IV. To go back in Rocky IV, that was the film where Rocky fought Ivan Drago, the legendary Dolph Lundgren, in Moscow, Russia. Rocky came out the victor, and that's how the movie ended. Still quite wealthy, etc. Rocky V starts out, we quickly find out that he had an unscrupulous accountant that blew all of his money. Rocky has lost everything, literally overnight in the blink of an eye. The only thing that he has left is his brother-in-law's poly old residence in Philadelphia, and his old mentor, Mickey Goldmill, left his gym in his will to Rocky's son, Robert, who's a teenager in this movie. So the other issue, too, is that Rocky ends up going for a medical and realizing that he's got severe brain trauma from the previous fight with Ivan Drago, and that he cannot be licensed to fight again. So once you think he's out of money, you think, well, if he just fights again, well, he can't. So we then see him at the old gym in Philadelphia, kind of where he started out, basically. And a young fighter by the name of Tommy the Machine Gun, comes along and asks Rocky for help in training him and getting through the boxing world. Rocky, in a way, sees himself in this young fighter and decides to start training him. Throughout the training, though, you see that it's clearly obvious that Tommy's clearly using Rocky for his own advantage and doesn't have that heart and soul that Rocky had. His family, his friends are trying to tell him this, but he just won't have any of it. Eventually what happens is Tommy does betray Rocky, sort of leaving him in the dust, but Rocky still believes in Tommy. Tommy has his big fight for the championship of the world, comes out the victor, does a nice victory speech, and just when you think he's going to thank Rocky, he ends up turning around thanking the scrupulous promoter instead. The promoter in this movie is kind of a ripoff of Don King. He acts like Don King. And, he's truly in it for the money. So what happens at the end is the fans and the reporters are all against Tommy Gunn for not supporting Rocky. And the promoter basically tells him in a nutshell, the only way you're going to get respect is if you fight Rocky. So as we know, Rocky can't fight in the ring. He won't get licensed. So a street fight challenge is done towards the end of the movie. And there's a street fight. And I will admit, the street fight itself is pretty cool. I enjoy it. I can watch it over and over again. It is pretty cool to watch. But you do see that it's not the same tempo or level that you saw in the previous Rocky movies, such as Rocky III, Rocky IV, well, any of the Rocky movies for that matter. But in any event, it's a street fight. There's no referees, kind of anything goes, and it's Rocky versus Tommy. And at the end of the movie, Rocky wins. During the movie, you find he's in a strange relationship with his teenage son. They're sort of growing apart, and they get to come back together towards the end of the movie. So let me go into the cons of the movie, okay? Let me start off with that first. So the first obvious con in this movie is the fact that he loses all his money. Rocky's a national hero. He's a former heavyweight champion of the world. You would think that family, friends, other stars, celebrities, or fellow athletes for that matter, would come out and help Rocky in his time of need instead of leaving him basically in the gutters financially. So I find that a little hard to believe, as well as it was instantaneous that when he got home, he found his money's gone, and it seemed like within a day he's out of his estate and in the neighborhood. And in reality, it takes a lot longer than that in those types of situations. So that was hard to swallow. The next issue I had was the age progression of his son. So in the previous movie, Rocky IV, you can clearly see that he is, roughly 6 years old, 7 years old, around that age. And Rocky 5 makes a point of saying, hey, listen, we're picking up immediately after the events of Rocky 4. Because in the very beginning, his plane comes back from Russia in the beginning of Rocky 5, and we see his son run out to meet him. The only problem now is his son is actually a teenager, opposed to being 6 years old. So he basically aged about 10 years in a matter of weeks. So that becomes a slight issue. Having said that, though, his Sylvester Stallone's late son Sage actually portrays Robert in this movie, so that's pretty cool too. Um, and we'll get into what happened with Sage later on in the review. It's a very tragic event there in the Stallone family history. But Sage does a really good portrayal as Robert, and I quite liked it. You could really see the father and son moment in this movie, and you really saw that relationship, progress. So the other con I have in this movie is the fact that Adrian's going back to the pet store. Everything seems to be going backwards in this movie. Um, to me, it just seemed a little bit dramatic. Why she go back to that job? Why not try another job? She's a very intelligent lady. And then the other issue is the fact that he's donning his 1970s attire. So we see him in Rocky 4. He's dressed really slick. He's dressed very sharp. He's very articulate. In Rocky 5, he's putting on his 1970s fedora, his 1970s leather jacket, his pants, etc. And it just seemed like you're trying to go back to the heyday of Rocky and bring that out for whatever reason. So I found some cons with that. Just the pace of the movie, it was, it just didn't seem like a typical Rocky movie. The training montage wasn't there. The soundtrack in this movie is actually not very good. There's a lot of 1990s kind of rap music in it, and it just, to me, it didn't fit into the Rocky movie. I will say though, the end credits, the title song, "The Measure of a Man," performed by Elton John, is very well done. So that is a good song for this movie. Let's get into some of the pros. So I don't think they intentionally made this movie with the thoughts that we're going to develop Rocky into have a different setting in life. And what I mean by that is the follow-up movies that would come after Rocky 5, Rocky Balboa, and the two Creed movies that would come out after that. I don't believe they had that in their mindset when they made this movie, but it does help that because we see that he's now living a modest life in Rocky Balboa and Creed 2, and that actually helps that storyline. So that's one pro, but I don't think they intended for that pro to be there. The other pros in this movie is it does have a life lesson like all of the Rocky movies. And Rocky 5 is, even though you think you've been beaten down, you can still get back up. So that part of it I really enjoyed in Rocky 5 as well. And Stallone is in pretty good shape. At this time, I believe he's around roughly 44 years old during the filming of Rocky 5, and he looks pretty good in this movie. So I like that fact. Some interesting tidbits of this movie, though. A couple of the main actors from this movie have passed on. Like I said earlier, with his son Sage. Sage, unfortunately, was deemed to be an accidental drug overdose in the 2000s. Unfortunately, passed away with painkillers. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't a suicide. It was a tragic event that has forever changed Sylvester Stallone for as anybody that would lose a child. So that's very sad. The second one is the main antagonist, Tommy the Machine Gun. He had some tough times later in life too, and he did pass away. There's different reports on how he passed away, but he passed away in the 2000s as well. So a couple tragedies came from this after the film was released, of course. But anyways, the bottom line with Rocky 5 is I think it gets a lot more hate than it deserves. Having said that, though, when you've got some really good Rocky movies out there and you put this one out, there is some high expectations and a bar to be set. And I truly feel that it didn't meet that standard, the Rocky standard. So for that reason, it is the least enjoyable Rocky movie of the saga. Question I often get asked is, can you skip Rocky? If you're trying to start the Rocky saga, can you skip Rocky 5? I wouldn't skip it per se, but I would watch it because it'll give reference to why Rocky is living like he is. So at the end of the day, out of a scale of 1 to 10, I give Rocky 5 about a 6. 6 out of 10. It wasn't a bad movie, but it wasn't a great Rocky movie either. I will admit, when I binge watch the Rocky series, and I do it every so often, I do often skip Rocky 5. Or I'll just watch the street fight. And again, the street fight is a guilty pleasure. It is pretty cool. But again, it's just not the type of movie that I feel raises the bar in the Rocky saga. One last point to make, and I didn't mention in this review, and I should, is that there is a cameo of Burgess Meredith in a flashback as Mickey that they refilmed for this movie. And there also is a really cool scene when Rocky's in the street fight and he's going down, that the ghost of Mickey appears. And I thought that was pretty cool, and that was pretty neat. Shortly after filming this movie, unfortunately, Burgess Meredith did pass away. He's quite elderly at the time. And I thought that was a cool throwback to the Rocky series. This movie, again, was made to be like the bookend of the series. And thankfully, in 2006, that changed things when Rocky Balboa came out. I'll go into Rocky Balboa in another review, but that is a review of Rocky 5. Should you see it? Yes. Do you need to watch it if you're binge watching Rocky a second time around? You could probably skip over it. But anyways, that's my review. Have a great day, folks. See ya.